Comedy from a corner shop in half an hour when Sanjay goes on work experience at the local paper. Fags, Mags and Bags is at 11:30. First on Radio 4, we travel to Cumbria. For over 150 years, Barrow in Furness has been an industrial town bordered by beautiful coastal scenery. Since the 1960s, Britain's nuclear submarines have been built there, but far fewer people are needed nowadays to make these specialised high-tech vessels. And with the nation's economy causing concern and local public service cuts looming, the town's future is uncertain, as Bob Dickinson explores in Barrow.
I've come to a part of England I've been visiting all my life, really. If you don't know this place and you ever find yourself here, it's unlikely you'll just be passing through on the way to somewhere else, because it's right at the end of a very long peninsula that sticks out into the Irish Sea. You can just hear the Irish Sea in the background. North of Morecambe Bay. Barrow in Furness is a destination you've got to want or need to get to. And when you do, you'll see how different it is from the rest of Cumbria, the county it happens to be in, famous for those Lakeland Hills, which are a world away from Barrow. If it hadn't been for industry of the heavy sort, there'd never have been any Barrow in Furness. First there was an ironworks, then they built the docks, and then they started making ships. And the town spread over Barrow Island and across to Walney. By the turn of the 20th century, Vickers Engineering, who ran the shipyards, was the town's biggest employer. Nowadays it's not so much surface ships that Barrow's known for, but nuclear submarines, fabricated inside a huge covered dock hall by BAE Systems. Their managing director is a former naval architect, John Hudson.
We used to employ around 14,000 employees back in the sort of 1980s, and we had what we call the Vanguard programme, which employed a large number of people. And as we had perestroika and the peace dividend as a consequence of that, then inevitably defence spending reduced and the commitment to submarine spending reduced as well. So we went from 14,000 down to 3,000, and I think that had a very profound impact on the community. I think the community is quite resilient. I think they have a slightly greater diversity in the economy now than there was maybe 20 years ago. I'm delighted to say that we are now back in the business of building nuclear submarines for the Royal Navy. We've now taken our employment up to sort of 5,000 people.
My dad came from Barrow. He left at 18. There was a war on. And he never lived there again as long as he lived. But we always used to go up there to visit family. And I remember, back in the 60s, seeing one of the first nuclear submarines, maybe HMS Dreadnought. And I can remember how run down Barrow got in the 80s. Now Barrow Council are about to announce cuts to public services. Are things going to go back to the bad old days? That's what I wanted to find out about for this programme, because how does an industrial town so isolated keep going nowadays? And how can it reinvent itself? I went to the town hall to meet the council's chief executive, Tom Campbell.
As a council, we have projected deficit, quite a significant deficit. We are going to have to bring our net expenditure down by close to 30%. That can't happen without an impact on services. We have a whole council election coming up. So once we have a new administration in place, they'll have to review all of the services that we provide, decide what their priorities are, and decide how they're going to achieve that difficult balance. And it's about how can you raise more income, how can you keep your overheads down, how can you share costs with other people, but also it'll have to be about what are the important services and what are the less important services. And there will be a reduction in services. It's just not possible to achieve this level of rebalancing of accounts by efficiency.
I don't think it's useful to spin another yarn about how grim it is up north. All the same, as I sat last November in an office on Michelson Road, on the bridge that leads to Barrow Island, the view outside was bleak and cold. I was talking to Kerry Colby, who runs the independent production company Signal Films.
It's quite desolate and windswept, the bridge. It's quite a sort of bleak, windy place, really. You don't see many people coming past. It's not really a place you would walk down unless you needed to, because it's a long stretch of road. I mean, I'm 32 I can remember when I was little going to see my grandma and granddad on Barrow Island, and you used to watch out, you try not to get stuck in the traffic because you'd get hundreds of bicycles coming over the bridge and everybody flying out. They'd all be waiting at the gate for the gates to open so they could get out on time. But it's a very different place now.
But I'd forgotten about the bits of Barrow, really horrible some of them, that aren't actually there anymore. When I met Jamie Frankland, he reminded me. He used to work at Vickers himself and now co-runs his own company, Optech, in modern drive-in surroundings not far from the town centre.
There was nothing. There was a shipyard and there's cranes on the skyline and there was absolutely nothing here. And as the yard started to take a downturn and lay people off, other things grew from it. If you see where Hollywood Park is now, I remember Cade's Foundry being on there, and it was a bleak place, really. And you see the slag banks as you came in along Park Road, and it's really picked up. You know, the younger element will say there's still not much here, but compared to when I was younger, there's an awful lot more here.
On the other hand, there are some places they're very sensitive about in Barrow, like the tenement flats on Barrow Island. They were originally built for shipyard workers and they're undeveloped. When Channel 4 transmitted a Secret Millionaire programme a couple of years ago, the flats were shown to illustrate a bad aspect of Barrow, along with other places like the so-called Gaza Strip, the nightclub area in the town centre. Then came a survey in 2009 saying Barrow was the most working-class town in England, based on the number of working men's clubs, bookies and chip shops per head of the population, which is roughly 70,000, by the way. To top that, Retail Magazine said Barrow wasn't posh enough for Marks and Spencer. They ought to close their shop on Dalton Road. Signal Films were moved to make a documentary on the state of things. Coast of Soap Ships, it was called.
Aye, they think Barrow would dump after that secret millionaire. Atari has a few quid spare and thinks he can exploit our town.
Then some southerner says we're not worth a Marks and Spencer's. All outsiders do is put Barrow down.
What they do when they do documentaries of Barrow, it's always the flats and the worst part of the flats.
They didn't show anything nice. You know, they made it out to be all horrible. Yeah.
So I thought it was refreshing when I went to see Anne Wilson, the Barrow-born poet, performing a piece inspired by the council's campaign to rally support for their much-maligned town, so down on itself.
Shift, shuffle, faster shuffle, it's the weekend sway, where there's no at the end of the day, 'cause at the end of the day it's dark, and the glitz might be kitsch, but it's a spark in the stark, and the smokers outside are lighting up, and the alco pop kids are throwing up, and I get a feeling this town needs bigging up. Let's live it up. It's Saturday, it's late, and if you're going to fit in, you need to relate. So turn in the crowd and talk to your neighbour. Turn in the crowd, talk to your mates. Talk to the man who's had his nose crammed in your back for half an hour. Don't be slack, because if you're going to be crammed, you might as well be tight. I love you, Barrow. Happy weekend. Good night.
But regeneration has started in Barrow. The council hatched ambitious plans for a waterfront project with a marina and even a terminal for cruise liners. Ships ahoy, tourists waving. But it hasn't been plain sailing. In the town centre, with Marks and Spencer still happily intact, I took note of other developments. In the middle of the shopping centre in Barrow, I noticed lots of shops in the centre that are closed down, which isn't very surprising anywhere really in the north of England now. There's lots of shops that are closed down, but what they've done in Barrow is they've put photographic posters over the shop fronts, over the windows, to make it look as if there's still a shop. And the funny thing is that in those pictures there are famous celebrities. So you can look at a shop that's derelict and closed down, and it's got a picture of a bookshop pasted onto it with Beyonce walking through it, or Wayne Rooney, or Posh and Becks. Very strange. And so, of course, when I met Val Holden from Barrow Council's Regeneration Department, I wanted to know what impact the government's cuts were having.
We're just in the process of seeing everything vanish before our eyes at the moment. We just felt that we were getting somewhere.
What would be the first thing that comes to mind that worries you, that's disappearing?
Well, the biggest thing is that the funding has gone. So NWDA, the Northwest Development Agency, who've looked after us for a number of years now, 15 years, they've just about gone, they're about to go. So it's not just the money that's gone, it's those people who've built up quite a bit of knowledge about our town and our economics and what's best for the town.
And at the offices of Furness Enterprise, which was set up in 1991 to attract businesses to Barrow and the surrounding area, Harry Knowles is feeling frustrated. I was asking him what help he's so far been able to offer Furness firms, and he replied straight out.
Until relatively recently, we were able to provide a reasonable amount of financial help to those companies to enable them to develop new products, invest in new equipment, and thereby create and safeguard jobs. But for reasons that completely baffle me, the government has decided to virtually abolish, except in the most unusual circumstances, an excellent scheme called Grants for Business Investment. And Grants for Business Investment does what it says on the tin. It was financial assistance to companies to help them invest in new productive kit, producing new products or producing existing products more efficiently, thereby creating and safeguarding jobs. And the government's decided to eliminate that. And that has affected not only those companies I've mentioned, sort of in solid state lighting, but all the way up to companies like BA Systems or Kimberly-Clark manufacturing toilet rolls. All of those companies have benefited from the Grant from Business Investment Scheme or its predecessor, and the government has eliminated that.
Jamie Franklin's company, Optech, are a good example of a company that's done well so far. Currently employing 36 people, they began installing fibre optic cables. Optech's founders sold out to an American company in 2001, but in 2005, Furness Enterprise helped with a management buyout. They're facing increasing competition these days, though.
I think if we'd stayed just a pure fibre optic installer, we'd have gone a long time ago. I mean, we're an NIC electrical contractor, so we carry out electrical works. We have a support side, an IT support, so we install servers, switches, routers, so we do the hardware side of it. And we still have guys installing the cables in buildings and factories all over the country. So I think it's the diversity. You know, we can install laser links. We've just had to be all things to all men almost. So yeah, it is very hard.
So I needed to see the thing that's still really the beating heart of Barrow's industry. Ex-submariner Tom Ainscough took me round BAE Systems' Devonshire Dock Hall, that thing that looks from the outside rather like a giant shed looming over the town.